Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 2 of Sex Work with the Butterfly Princess, Steph Marie and Amy Taylor. Episode 2, we're now looking at cultural attitudes towards the work of sex work and sex workers. We're going to be looking at how different countries throughout the world look towards sex work and how they legalise it and what their perceptions of it is, because obviously throughout different countries in the world, not just in Europe but in the world, they have differing views and opinions and a way to sort of stigmatise it in their country. So obviously, we're going to be starting off with the Netherlands. So obviously in the Netherlands, sex work is legal. So it is legal, for sex work to take place in the Netherlands. The Dutch often view it as a legitimate form of labour, provided that it's regulated within regulated environments. And obviously, if you've ever been to the Netherlands, especially the red light district, and it's often been portrayed in media, sort of film and TV shows, that you will see sex workers in windows and stuff like that. So hi Amy, thank you for joining me again for episode 2. So Netherlands, obviously it is a legal form of labour there, and it's viewed as a legitimate form of labour for people to get paid. But what are sort of the regulations? Because I sort of mentioned that regulations have to be adhered to in the correct environment.
Yes, that's correct. It's so nice to be back. Good to see you again.
Yeah.
And yeah, in the Netherlands, that is correct. They do regulate it, they legalize it, they tax it. They have relatively liberal attitudes toward it. The brothels have licenses, there's registrations, there's medical checks, and those things provide sex workers with access to health services. They don't lose, and then some degree of protection. They can call police for help if things go wrong, unlike in criminalized countries. However, there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's still stigma. Legalization doesn't cure the fact that people judge and hate sex work, even though they love to hire them. And then there are labor abuses. There are some of those, the red light district studios that you talked about that every tourist has seen. There are dirty landlords who demand sex or favors or this or that or payola. And if they don't get that, they jack up the rent or make the woman's life hell who works there. The government there has cracked down on some of those dirty landlords there that run those studios. They do the best they can, but those are labor issues, and there are labor abuses in every industry, in media, broadcasting, that you do, in every industry. And so at least there, they can handle those issues as regular labor issues like any other type of work. The problem some people have is that there are customers who don't enjoy being thought of as work because of their own shame of paying for it. They would still like the escort to work for less or for free, or to not stay in her studio where she can have protection, because essentially a lot of customers have a lot of self shame about being thought of as work. They don't like the idea that they've paid for sex and that the person wouldn't be doing it for free. That is a problem of stigma, and we don't have good ways to deal with that except to change social norms. And that's still not there on that front, but at least they're there on legalization, which provides some safety for the workers. So certainly better than a criminalized country.
Also in Germany, but also this is a country that also takes a pragmatic approach, recognising the work of sex work and sex work as legal labour, like the Netherlands. But some sort of the regulation that they introduced was they introduced the Prostitution Act in 2002, and this allows the work of sex workers to be legalised, and it also entitles sex workers to social benefits, health insurance, and legal rights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's been, for the most part, great. The people who hate it still complain that there is what they call trafficking. Now, most of the trafficking is just immigrants moving to Germany to work in sex work to make more money than they can make elsewhere. There are some traffickers who are abusive, making women work more than they want, or taking too much of their money, or otherwise controlling them. Those things happen. Again, those are labor issues. The government handles them case by case, and they're bad for sure. But most of the hysteria in Germany about largely Eastern European women or Asian or from elsewhere in the world working there, it's simply immigrant women who are there to make money. Is it the world's best job? Well, no, sure. They'd probably rather be doctors, or I don't know, maybe not. Maybe they're happy. I don't know any of them, but this is a space in which they can work in the clubs in Germany. And again, while it's not problem free, it is certainly better than criminalized countries because of what you said, that 2002 act allowed them to get social benefits, health insurance. I mean, in criminalized countries like America, if you tell your insurance that you're a sex worker, you will not be able to get health care at all. You will lose your housing, you'll get evicted. I mean, criminalized is way worse, but Germany has some distance to go to make it better, and I hope they do. I really hope they do.
And we're now moving around to the region of Scandinavia, so like Sweden, Norway, them sort of places. So again, Sweden views, they have another view, but they view sex work and sex workers through a feminist lens, focusing on gender equality and the notion that their work inherently exploits women. Now, the way in which they regulate the work of sex workers is they adopt something called the Nordic model. Now, this criminalises the purchase of sex work, but not its sale, aiming to reduce demand and trafficking. So, what goes back in terms of like the meat? So I suppose for somebody, a prospective client, you know, it's illegal for them to sort of purchase sex, but it's not legal for the sex worker to sort of sell sex, and this hopes to reduce demand and trafficking.
Correct. Your research is correct. Thanks for that. So yes, the Nordic model, which is what effectively the state of Texas in America has sort of done, and I fear is probably the future of my country. I hope I'm wrong. I'd like to be wrong. The Nordic model attempts to reduce demand, thinking that this is demand driven. It's a new version of the Victorian era idea that no woman could be a sex worker happily, that every woman in this is miserable and would rather do something else, and that it's because of evil men, blah, blah, blah. That's a new version of that Victorian idea that women are children, we're weak, we don't know our own minds. They just can't understand that some of us, like men, we don't hate the male sex drive and we like to fuck. I'm sorry. Not willy-nilly, safely. I've never had an STD. I don't fuck anybody I don't want to. Nobody's ever forced me to fuck for money. I fuck who I want, when I want, and why I want. And yeah, if they're generous, that's great, but it's never forced me to do anything I wouldn't have done anyway, because I liked them. So this Nordic model believes that I don't know my own mind, that it's only male demand that made me. And it's a view of women as weak and children, and it's the same thing. It's a new tack. it's expanding everywhere in the world. The idea is if they can remove the social norm, if men can be shamed and arrested into like not ever thinking they could or should buy sex, then we will change social norms. Well, it's insane. They think they can outlaw or stigmatize away the male sex drive. You will never write laws stronger than Mother Nature and biology, folks. You never will. And their argument is, well, you know, people would do all kinds of bad things and we make them illegal because don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Okay, fine. But what it's doing when it's implemented is it's when clients are very scared of being arrested, sex workers who are often trying to survive day to day financially, it pushes them into accepting less screening, lower rates, more dangerous working conditions, because the alternative to them is homelessness and no food. And when you're telling them your alternative is homelessness and no food, they'll do a lot to try to buy food and shelter. So all it does is push them into more dangerous working environments. There's no data to show that it has reduced it at all. It's an idiotic tactic, and it's a resurfacing of this Victorian idea that women don't know their own minds and bodies.
And also, so following on from that, we're talking now, we're moving on to a fellow Scandinavian country of Norway. And again, this is similar to Sweden. It follows also employs the Nordic model. But it sees the work of sex workers as gender-based violence.
Yeah, it's the same as we talked about there. The Scandinavian, it's a very feminist world with women having much more equity, equality, income, power, and that's all great. But like we talked about earlier, that feminists hate us as much as the religious conservatives do. This model is in their attempt to somehow legislate away the male sex drive, which is insane. They're putting us in more danger, and it's not working at all. But this is what they're trying now.
So now we're moving on to a different continent now, and this is the continent of Asia. So we're going to look at the countries of Thailand and Japan. We'll start first with Thailand. Now, again, Thailand has a very complex relationship with the work of sex workers, and this is both widespread and stigmatized. It's technically illegal. Sex work is technically illegal in Japan, in Thailand, but it's often unofficially regulated. And law enforcement can be inconsistent and sometimes corrupt.
That's correct. Your research is correct. So Thailand is famous for sex tourism in the Patpong night market in Bangkok and elsewhere in Phuket, and yet they don't have legal rights. And so there's a lot of payola and favors. The go-go bar owners, which are often expats, they're not Thai. The cops that have their hand in the cookie jar, money wise and sex wise. And so there's still exploitation. However, it is still a lot of times the most money a young woman from a poor family can make. So it's done. There are very few legal protections, but there's a lot of corrupt sort of organized crime protections. It's a real mess. I don't know why they don't just legalize or decriminalize it, because it's certainly already there in mass. You can see it everywhere you go if you visit. But they, I guess, haven't made a plan, and so they've just kind of left it this Wild West unregulated system, and that's what it is there.
And Japan, now this country has a more conservative view of sex work with traditional values, and this in turn influences public opinion. Although various forms of the work of sex workers and sex work is legal and regulated, there are other areas that remain illegal, but there are some grey areas in the law that creates inconsistent enforcement.
You're correct. They also, like Thailand, have just simply not been willing to address the reality that it exists. And so there is no legal framework. There are very few people even talking about how to make it better. And yet there are a lot of lonely Japanese paying for companionship. Ironically, there's a lot of women in Japan paying for male companionship at these bars. Some sex is happening, but it's not outright sold. It's largely companionship. Uh, and so there is a vast attention economy and perhaps sexuality on the side informally, but they just have done nothing to go ahead and have an honest conversation about people trading sexual attention for assets as they do there, just like in every city and country on planet Earth.
Moving on to the Americas now. So firstly about the USA, United States. Obviously we know that America is a very deeply religious country, and as a result, it has a very diverse and conflicting view of the work of sex work and sex workers, and its influences by moral, religious, and feminist perspectives.
Yeah. So yeah, the US is a deeply religious, I think it's the largest religious country. I could be wrong about that. Don't at me, internet. I might be wrong. But yeah, so there's a couple counties in Nevada where it is legal, regulated. They're brothels. You can go. Those are like heavily regulated. The prices are quite high because it's all above board and taxed and medical exams. Some people really like that. They don't have to worry about the fear of being arrested or the medical issue because those places are above board. The data shows they've not had any diseases, and there are brothel owners who are pretty abusive. I had some contact with one who's deceased now, Dennis Hoff. He was very famous, and he was a real piece of shit. Awful. If he wanted me to work for him, I never did, but he was a monster. And good riddance. I'm glad he's dead. But that system, the psychological data shows that the brothel workers there have much better much better mental health and self-esteem outcomes than do workers in a criminalized environment. So while brothels aren't perfect, there's labor issues just like any other job. They are far better than the criminalized environment that exists in most of America. We have passed a law a few years ago called Sesta Fosta, which took away the websites where we communicated to stay safe, to screen clients, to share information about how to stay alive. They made all of that illegal, and there are many thousands of sex workers who have died as a result, and America doesn't care. We experience more violence, more exploitation. Pimps are having a heyday in America now because of Sesta Fosta, because women can't stay safe online. They've gone back, especially the most vulnerable and the youngest, have gone back to the old-fashioned pimp environment, and that's terrible. And can't get access to legal resources or banking or proper housing. It's an absolute nightmare in America, and there are advocacy groups trying to do good work, but meanwhile there's a vast religious right who just wants sex workers dead. And again, that's ironic because most of our clients are right-wing and often very religious, and I guess they want to benefit from our bodies, and then they don't care if we die, which is phenomenal to me, but seems to be the case in America, that Americans would like to use us and then kill us. Super.
What about the attitudes of Canada? So, Canadians' attitudes towards sex work and sex workers are evolving with increasing regulations of sex workers' rights.
Yeah, they're much better. Our upstairs neighbors are much better than us in America. Massage parlors and brothel type of environments are basically legal. It depends on the details. But there is a lot of recognition of their rights, and they have it better. And in return for that, America has been stopping them at the border where they can't even come here once America knows that they're sex workers, which is insane. But there is some bad news on the horizon that a lot of a lot of the crazies in Canada who are sex phobic and who infantilize women and think that we don't know our own bodies and minds are pushing for this Nordic model that we talked about. It is gaining traction. And I fear that in the effort to infantilize and control women, that they will go that direction too. And I hope that I am wrong, but we will see.
Well, we're moving on now to the African continent. So there's two countries in Africa that we want to discuss their attitudes, and that is the country of South Africa and the country of Nigeria. Starting off with South Africa, this country is always grappling with significant stigma against the work of sex workers, and this is influenced by conservative religious views.
You're correct. South Africa, like all places, there's sex phobia driven by religious and conservatism and sexism, has made sex work worse and more dangerous. The HIV rates are higher. Their refusal to admit that people like to have sex and that we could reduce harm and do it more safely has made sex work in South Africa a real problem. There are, again, advocacy groups. I've done a show with one who are trying to push for decrim and other protections, but they haven't made a lot of headway. Sex workers face harsh punishment in South Africa. Sadly.
What about the fellow African country of Nigeria? Obviously, this holds conservative views on the work of sex workers. But again, like South Africa, this is influenced by religious and cultural norms.
Correct. It's the same. You are correct that because of conservatism, they are anti-sex work. Enforcement is very harsh against sex workers. So the Nigerians that I know are simply all sugar babies, finessing men dressed up in a more casual way that's less formal. It's the same thing. It's companionship. But I find it ironic because Nigeria is fairly traditional with men protecting and providing, and women being, men open their wallets for everything and women don't, in the same way as you see in sort of Dubai, that men are traditional that way. So it's ironic to me that men who like to provide would be anti-sex work when it's the same thing. But such be that as it may, the social stigma against it being outright sex work is profound and widespread there. So Nigeria, much like most of Africa, does not look kindly on sex work at all.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Amy, for giving us that cultural tour of like the different attitudes towards sex work in the different countries. That concludes episode 2, ladies and gentlemen. Next up, we will be looking at episode 3, and we'll be looking at health concerns and safety concerns, and also harm reduction strategies. So hope you can join us for that. Thank you.